Since the committee members are seated, I'm not sure, our chair seems to have been delayed somewhat. Why don't we start with the introductions while we wait for him? If we could begin back in that corner.
Name, organization.
Name and organization.
My name's Leslie Dwyer, and I'm with Johnson CLT.
Janella Walker, Engineering Property Management.
Mike Nail, Engineering Property Management.
Jennifer Smith, Engineering Property Management.
Morning, afternoon, Tiffany Waddell, Office of Constituent Services.
Maya Figures, CBI.
Kathleen Seshek, Engineering Property Management.
Stephanie Burwell, representing the Charlotte Business Inclusion Advisory Committee.
Maria Miles, Engineering Property Management.
Thomas Powers, the Attorney's Office,
Wake
CBI
up, Tom.
Counsel.
Lena James with the City Attorney's Office.
Mike Sullivan, Charlotte East.
Wayne Gillespie, Charlotte East.
Let's go back to that corner.
Megha Philly, Economic Development. Holly Eskridge, Economic Development.
Sandra Long, Economic Development.
Sky Khalifa, Charlotte Business Inclusion.
Sam Montanez, Charlotte Business Inclusion.
Karen Gillespie with Economic Development.
Lillian John, Economic Development.
Jeremy Mills with Office of Constituent Services.
Around the table.
Bob Hageman, City Attorney.
Tark Kari, District 6.
Angela Green, Development.
Justin Harlow, Committee Member.
Ed Driggs, committee member.
Lawana Mayfield, Committee Member.
Matt Newton, Committee Member, District 5.
William Haas, Engineering and Property Management.
Nancy Rosado, Management and Financial Services.
Started the meeting.
Ed
Vice Chair.
Did you text me and say you were starting the meeting?
I just did the introduction, sir. I thought we'd get to kick it off.
No, did you text me and say you were starting the meeting?
Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone.
ASC. Who are you turning it over to? No, but we have to spare the study update. Sorry. MBE.
Okay.
All right.
Which one we're doing first? Thank you.
Has everyone had a chance to introduce themselves?
Yes.
Okay. So now I have, I would turn it over to, she's not new anymore. This is her.
Still new.
Oh, still new? She's still new. Turn over Ms. Tracy Dawson. Tracy, can you introduce the items, please?
Thank you, Councilman Mitchell. We had originally had the disparity study on the agenda as the main item, but we thought that based on Monday night's discussion that it might be good to back up and cover some of the methodology and the goals for MSBE subcontracting. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Nancy and William to run through the presentation.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
So we're going to cover today the agenda. William is going to kind of kick us off and start with construction delivery methods, just a high-level overview of the various different ways that the city does construction projects. And then he's going to give us some background on the construction manager at risk overview, which was kind of part of the process used for the project from Monday. We're going to use kind of the CMPD Central Division Station project as the example for how we set goals on projects. Then we're going to talk a little bit about that. William will cover all of those three bullets, and then I'll cover the last two around the CBI subcontracting goals methodology that we use on projects. And these are the goals that we establish on project-specific goals, and then a policy discussion around kind of where do we go from here and how to increase subcontracting goal levels. So William will kick us off.
All right. So I want to make sure that everybody's kind of on the same page. I know for folks that are new, I want to make sure that everybody understands that we have 4 common ways that you're probably going to see construction contracts come across your agenda. So the first one, the traditional design bid build, that's kind of what we refer to it. Y'all probably refer to it as hard bid. That's 90%, maybe more than 90% of what comes across your agenda. You approve a design contract, we get to the end, there's goals that are set by Nancy's team, it's bid, we take a hard bid, and then it comes to you for award. We have design build. We've not done that many in the city, but it's going to start to become more popular for you. Just know that also goals are going to be set similar ways that Nancy's going to describe later. The project that you were debating Monday night, Cement Risk, that's one where the Cement Risk contractor holds all subcontracts. You were asked to approve a $20 million contract. That's kind of the big picture. And then they award all the subcontracts underneath that have goals that are set again. Same way we're going to talk about. That's reserved for really complex jobs that are large dollar value. And that's kind of the way I look at the world anyway. It's not a common way to do projects that you see, but it's something that's larger for larger scale projects. We've done about 15, 20 of those throughout the time. And then we have construction manager at agent. That's also for complex, large jobs. You're familiar with that as Blue Line extension, Blue Line. That's kind of how that got done. And there, the city holds all the subcontractors. The CMED agent's just there to help. So let's make sure you're all on the same page about how CMED Risk works. For that, we issue an RFQ, goes out on the street. That's done per state statute. That's a requirement of how we pick CMED Risk firms. When we receive those proposals in, we're usually looking for the experience of the firm with similar projects, the familiarity with the local market, the sub-market and permitting process, and what their prior experience is with diversity programs. So those are three key things we look at when we're selecting. We ask council to approve a pre-construction services contract where they help us review plans, do cost estimating, work on schedules. All that is done in parallel with the design. So we're hiring this firm at the same time we're hiring a designer. So then somewhere along the design process, 60-75% of the design process, they're coming up with an estimate. They have a scope, have an estimate, and then my group, Nancy's group, the CMED Risk firm, we're looking at the scopes and setting goals at that time. After the goals are set, the CMED Risk hosts an outreach session to make sure subcontractors know about the job, they're interested in it. We review the project in detail, talk about the schedule, the budget, and then what the goals are. So that goes out to the community. For the project that you were asked to debate Monday night, that happened in May. They're asked to pre-qualify all first-tier subs. I know that's kind of a fancy term, but that just make sure that all the subs that they're looking at are on solid footing financially and that they got good experience. We negotiate the final terms of the contract based on the 95% value. That number you need to keep that in mind because that number is going to be different than what Nancy has to deal with at 70-75%, 60-75%. She's setting goals at 60-75%. The final contract's based on the 95% estimate. Does that make sense? Then at that point, council is asked to award the CMED Risk contract. That's where we were Monday night. From that point, the CMED Risk advertises all the individual bid packages per state statute. The bids come in. My staff, Nancy's staff, the CMED Risk review all the bids, look at the good faith efforts, look at the CBI goals, and then at that point, we sign off and agree that the CMAR can award those bid packages to the lowest responsive bidder, again, per state statute. It's converted to a guaranteed maximum price per state statute, and then the low bidders then are working for the CMED Risk, and work begins per state statute.
So we don't do a check-in committee. Everybody's veteran. I know I got two veterans, but everyone's clear. Good doctor.
So yeah, so when you say that the CBI goals are set at 60 to 75% of the design phase, that's
Yes.
different than you went later into a conversation around 95% of the cost estimate, which is a couple bullets apart here. don't clarify that for me a little bit. So the goals are set at a different value of the
Yes,
contract?
and we'll get to that in the next slide.
Okay.
Okay.
Don't steal my thunder. Let's get in the next slide.
Good deal.
Councilman Newton, you okay? All right, thank you.
So next slide. This is how the edifice contract that you were asked to consider Monday night at a total value of $20,203,777. This is how that breaks out. So at the very top, bid packages, $16.5 million, again, small print, based on the 95% design. What you're going to hear Nancy describe is she based her goals on the 70-ish% cost estimate, which was about a $14 million
So
value at that time.
it's the sheet right here, correct? So
Yes.
Nancy based hers on the 14,619.
So just in the course of finishing up the design, the prices increased. Scope stayed the same, prices increased.
Vice Chair?
Is that done that way just in order to have the sequence of events right, that you start to establish those goals at that point rather than doing so later?
Yes, sir, that is correct.
So that you can kind of reach a solution, as it
That
were?
is correct. We do then go back and just confirm that the scope within the 16 and a half, for example, in this specific project, is generally the same scope as what she set the goals on at 14 million, to make sure that there's nothing has changed in the goal setting process.
Okay.
The subs are still the same, it's just the dollar value
Okay.
increased. So the methodology in this case was the same.
So you have enough visibility at 60, 75% to start to define what, according to our policies, the goals can be.
Yeah, and throughout the project, if there are new scopes that come up or get added, then we look at those, and if there's a new scope, we would address that goal accordingly. So it may go up or down, but at 75%, the goal, the subcontracting opportunities are pretty identified.
Right, okay, thank you.
So then there's the detail on how the 20 million gets set up. But if you flip to the next one, Nancy.
Let me slow down with it. So, Dr. Harlow, that answers your question about the 65 and 70%, Nancy setting the goal, and then the 90%.
It does, and that was, I was kind of going where Mr. Driggs went. It was, and glad to see this kind of breakdown was more about, so how comfortable are we from the staff level to say, yeah, we're about 75% through this cost estimate? Are we at a place where we can, say, yeah, we're comfortable setting those goals? Sounds like that's what we've been doing.
We are, and then we always just make sure we reconfirm right before we go back out to the street. And before we come to you, we always just reconfirm we're in the same place on the goals.
And when scope changes to some degree, then those goals can be re-looked at.
And it's in the policy, it's in the language.
So here are the bid packages that for our project for the Central Police Station. This is what Edifice sees as the 37 packages they want to hit the street. They want to advertise, they want to pre-qualify, they want to advertise, set goals, and receive bids on all 37 of these bid packages. So these are individual scopes that have opportunities for folks to look at, and potentially, I won't say all, but most of them will have goals.
Vice Chair?
The goals that we establish are for the overall project. We don't assign goals to each of these, do we?
We will work with them and do both. So the goals that we established at 14 and 10 was for the overall project. And so then based on the opportunities that are available, they will assign, and we will work with them to confirm that each package has appropriate goals that will get them to that 14 and 10 or more.
But if they exceed the goal in one package, does that mean that it's okay within the aggregates not to meet the goal in another? Or are they expected to meet or
No,
exceed?
they're expected. So each package would have its subcontracting goal, and then if the bidder, when they're sending those packages out to bid, it's just like the way we do it. They would have to either meet the goal or show the good faith effort. So if they didn't meet the goal on a particular package, let's say signage, I don't know, it just jumped out at me, had a 10% subcontracting goal. If the bidder that responds to that first tier sub that responds to that, if they don't meet that 10% goal, then they would have to document their good faith efforts.
Right, yeah.
Who did you reach out to, just like if it were the city bidding that package?
But it could well happen that they end up with higher than the goals because of the fact that they're trying to meet them in each category, and in many cases, they'll end up doing better, right?
It could be that small business or MBE wins the bid,
Wins
and
the
that's,
bid.
and which could be 100%.
Yes.
Right, yeah.
Councilmember Mayfield.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Once the overall goal is set, if there are any amendments, are those amendments then still under that additional goal, or do we set? Are the amendments on the original set goal, or do we identify additional goals?
So if new subcontracting opportunities are identified?
Right, if they come in for any amendments, because we have a number of projects that come in for multiple amendments. What I'm wondering is the amendments still subject to the original goal setting, or are new goals identified?
So the process, if it was more money that was added to a particular scope, then they would typically say, we're going to use the same subs that we're already using on that particular project. So it would apply. If it's a totally brand-new scope, then yes, we would look at that opportunity, that package, and say, are there any sub-opportunities for that particular package? And we would include them and either increase the goal, or it may not impact the goal. It all depends on how much money and what the goal, what the opportunity is, I guess. So each new sub-opportunity that may arise is looked at like from a brand-new perspective, and goals are added to that as well.
Go right ahead.
So that's,
You're not eating, what's wrong?
Oh, I'm gonna wait 2 minutes.
so in general, that's kind of the story of CM at risk and the edifice piece. So hopefully, if there's no questions about that, I think Nancy's going to answer the detailed questions
Bingo.
about the
Methodology.
setting process and methodology.
And so, committee action Nancy to made reference here, good faith effort, GEFs. And so I asked Nancy to bring, copy. So, can you share that while, I'm going to recognize the distinguished gentleman from District 6, our honorary committee member.
Thank you, sir. Before we move on to the more broad, we're moving on past this specific and into the more broad methodology. So before that, I just want to go back to the process for CMAR. And the first bullet you said, where there's 3 bullets where after you submit the RFQ, basically once you submit that RFQ and you select the CMAR, every other bullet is then in scope with that one selected bidder, right? So that's where the decision-making process of 1 versus 8 or 9. It was 8 or 9 in this case?
It was 8 proposals.
8 proposals comes in. So when I look at those bullets, I'm going to assume experience with similar projects, prior experience with diversity programs, experience with local markets, and then obviously the quoted number are the 4 factors you pretty much put into narrowing that down?
It's not a quoted number.
It's not even a quoted number at that point.
No, we just asked them, what's your history with diversity programs? And it could be a hub, it could be a DBE, it could be our program. But what's your history with what were the goals and on that particular job, and what did you achieve? So we want to know what their history has been.
I have a specific question, but before I ask it, can you generically tell me why this firm was selected over the other 7, given those 3 criteria with no numbers?
That was a year ago. I don't specifically remember. We can look back and see how they rated, but I don't remember.
This was the part I really wanted to talk about, because I know from just looking at public records that when you look at the past track record, so 1, experience with similar projects. They did a CATS bus facility. They were $800,000 over in that one. Light rail facility, they were $3 million over the original quote there. When you look at prior experience with diversity programs in those same 2 projects, the CATS, they were cited and set at 25.4% with the diversity program. They came in at 14.3%. In the light rail facility, they were set at 12%. They came in at 9%. So when I look at 2 of the 3 factors, they must have some pretty significant experience with local markets to have been selected, right?
It's just whatever they submit in their proposal. They may not have
So you don't look in the past history and track record?
We look at the ones that they submit in that proposal.
Well, perhaps that might be something we start looking at in the future, how they have performed on the over $100 million of contracts we have awarded them in the past from the city, right? Wow. You would think so?
That could be a way
I would
we
think
could look
so.
at it. Fair enough.
Thank you, Councilmember. Wow. Okay. And did we get that part of the record? Okay, I wouldn't mind saying that.
Yeah, me too.
Wow, okay.
It's
Go ahead,
on
staff.
public record.
Wow.
They just turn around and just worded it.
So now we're going to get into kind of
Yeah.
a little bit more detail around the CBI subcontracting goal methodology. And so the first slide here talks about why we set project-specific goals. And so we want to make sure that we are aligning our goals to the market availability of MSBE firms, because those are the subcontracting goals we set. So we're only talking about minority small businesses. Women were found to not have underutilization. Therefore, we don't set subcontracting goals for women, which is white women-owned businesses. And it also, by setting project-specific goals, it provides the city a legally defensible framework for contract compliance. So if somebody said, why did you set that goal? We can show them, a sheet with formulas and documentation as to how we derived at that goal. The components for setting the project-specific goal, one of the main components is that there has to be a mathematical calculation for how did we look at availability and the project work scopes. So the city's methodology is an industry best practice, and it's one that's been endorsed by the American Contract Compliance. They teach it every year at the National Training Institute, and several of our team members, including those that are involved with setting the goals, participate in those trainings and are CCA certified. So it's also utilized, the methodology is utilized by the Department of Transportation for setting their disadvantaged business enterprise goals. And that's important because, and the DOT has been challenged in the past legally, and it's withheld legal scrutiny. So it's important for us to make sure that we're using a methodology that we can defend. And it minimizes the risk of litigation and reinforces to our bidders that the program is sound and it has a structured process. One thing that I want to make sure that everyone understands too is that when we set these subcontracting goals, they are not aspirational. There are liquidated damages involved if a bidder doesn't meet the subcontracting goals that we establish on a project. So it's not just we hope that you'll get to 14 and 10. If you don't get to 14 and 10, we will assess and can assess liquidated damages on the project. So that's something that's.
So Nancy?
Yep.
Based on that comment and the information that Councilmember Bakari shared on one of the CATS project, did we assess?
That might have been a DBE, and our office wasn't involved on that. So I'm not aware of.
So what was the second project? Because you gave us two. You say CATS and what was
CATS bus facility was at 25.4% set, and they came in at 14.3, and the light rail facility was at 12%, and they came in at 9.
They may have been DBE ones.
Both DBE, because those federal dollars.
We should.
Yeah. So a point making, they could have different guidelines because it's federal dollars, DBE, as opposed to our program.
Yeah, there's two main problems here, Mr. Chair. One is when we look back at the performance of what we're awarding, I mean, we're not awarding $100,000 deals here. These are tens of millions of dollar deals. And when people don't come in at what they agreed upon, I want to make sure we're evenly applying the liquidated damages stuff. And then two, it just boggles my mind to think that we allow them to set the examples by which they make an RFQ, not what they've actually done with us. I mean, I just will leave it at that. It is confounding to me that we have all this data and have awarded hundreds of millions of dollars of taxpayer dollars, and we don't utilize it when then making decisions in the future.
Vice Chair?
Can it also happen that they don't meet the goal because good faith efforts excuse them from having to meet the goal?
Not knowing the details, that is a possibility that, when they release packages, and I don't know what delivery method they used either for that. So it's, there are a lot of things factors that come into play. So I don't want to kind of try to make assumptions.
Okay.
That could be one of the possibilities. But again, we don't do DB, our office isn't responsible for any DB goals. So if it was a DBE project, we have similarities, but there are also a lot of differences in how the two programs operate and work.
Follow up?
Just to be clear, if we did not have the good faith efforts, this whole program would be illegal, right?
That's right. You have to, right.
You cannot make a requirement that these goals be met and impose a penalty if they aren't without having the escape hatch, the out clause that says if you show that you tried to do this and it wasn't you didn't get enough people wanting to do it or whatever, you satisfied the requirements, and that is one of the bases on which we're allowed to do anything like this.
And I think that's totally fair, Mr. Vice Chair. The only point I'd make is that if we're going to do this at all, right, and there are there are certainly two sides of the aisle on the view of this, but let's assume that the way it's constructed makes sense. I don't think anyone who knows the details of these good faith effort processes and how they work would say, oh, they're totally fair and they can't be gamed. I mean, they can absolutely be
sure
gamed.
can.
Yeah.
So, you know.
Yeah, good, valid point, valid. And that's why I wanted her to bring the information today, so we need to talk about good faith effort. Nancy, go right ahead.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry, Councilmember
No, I'll wait till
Mayfield.
the
I'm
end.
sorry, babe. Okay, at the end? Okay.
So how are SBE and MBE subcontracting goals established? These are the key factors that we need in order to establish our subcontracting goals using the methodology. We use the project estimate, which you're going to see me walk through it, and it's going to be at the 75%. So I wanted to make sure that you all keep that in mind, that it's going to be that $14.5 million figure and not the $16 million, because it was a different time period. So we use that estimate to identify and look at all the subcontracting scopes of work and associated costs. So for each scope of work, we're saying what's the value of that subcontracting opportunity. We then identify for each of those scopes who are the available SBEs and MBEs that are in our database that are certified, because those are the only certifications that we accept towards that goal. Then we calculate, we also look, it's not on there, but we also look at all the vendors for that particular scope. So we're looking at how many are MBEs and how many are there in totality.
Right.
And then we calculate the MBE and SBE availability for each scope. And in the next slide, you'll see this in a formula. So this is kind of just a bulleted point. And then we calculate the certified work scope amount, which kind of gets us to the weight for each of those particular scopes based on the availability. We then total all of those weights to arrive at our goal. And then we'll look at review historical data of any past similar projects that may have happened. We also look at things like what's going on in the market, what goals have we set in the past. So we take all of those factors into consideration.
Nancy, one question.
Yeah.
Councilmember Mayfield.
Can we go back, please?
Go
Thank
back
you,
one
Mr.
slide.
Chair. So looking at bullet 3, calculating the MBE, SBE availability for each scope. The question I have previously asked, and the question I'm still going to ask is, when we're identifying these scopes, and we see that we do not have a SBE or MBE in that goal, what specifically is the role and has been done to address that? Because that has been the conversation that we have been having for more than 4 years. There should never be a time where we say, well, we don't have enough SBE or we don't have an MBE that qualifies in that area if we are doing our outreach. So what exactly is the outreach to ensure that we are giving opportunities?
And so it depends on the scope. I mean, you know, for some scopes, there are opportunities for us to go out and recruit. So for example, if we see that, you know, in electrical, we have one, well, then there's an outreach strategy where we go out and recruit. And so that was the case a long time ago. We had like one company that would qualify, and so now we're up to about 6 or 7 in the electrical scope package. So we make a concerted effort to go out and recruit businesses and get them registered and certified. For some scopes, it's a little bit more complicated, and I'll use the example, Councilmember Mitchell, that we were talking about earlier. For precast, there are only 2 vendors. It's a big type of work and job, and so there are only 2, probably what, like in this area, definitely.
Yes, sir.
And so there is, in order to groom a business into that area, it's a significant process with a lot of investment, you know, for that firm. So it's not as easy to kind of just go out there and kind of develop a precast firm as it is to go out there and recruit firms that may already exist for certain scopes and commodities. So it, again, it depends on the scope, and I know that we're going to get to this in the last slide. We've had conversations about how do we do more when it comes to those areas that are really hard with a substantial dollar commitment and knowledge.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Excellent question.
So here's the formula. And so it includes all of the elements that we just talked about. So in order, the calculation to determine the certified work scope amount, which gets us to kind of that weight, is the dollar estimate for the scope. And I'll just use kind of painting as the example. So how much is the painting package worth on this particular contract? And then that gets divided by the dollar amount, the total cost of work for all of those bid packages. And then we multiply that figure by the work scope availability calculation, which is how many MBE painters do we have in our database, divided by how many total painters, regardless of certification, and regardless of race, gender, ethnicity, do we have in our database. And then we multiply those two figures, it gives us the MBE opportunity at a weighted level for that particular scope. And so we repeat that same exercise and formula for scope B, for scope C, for scope D, and the same for SBE as well.
So committee, did I give you Vice Chair? I have challenged the staff to go look at what our competitor cities are doing. Nashville, Austin, Texas, Orlando, Florida. I'm not sure the weighted formula gives us our best for our community. We've been having this discussion for many, many years about how do we improve. And so I think, Bob, you and I had a conversation yesterday. I think the first couple of years, we just focus on making our program better from a certification and to be able to legally stand the test in court. I think we need to change our mindset when we look at CBI. It is about increasing participation and awarding contracts to MBEs in our community. So we can think in those terms. We're not a baby anymore. Now we need to move forward. I think that type of discussion need to be had, and so we all will feel comfortable that this program is the best it could be. And so, Nancy, if you could bring some of the best practices, especially from those we compete against, I think it would be helpful for us to look at this in a different way.
And when you say best practice, just for the goal setting?
Yeah, just for the goal setting. Is everyone doing weighted, or some of our competitors are doing it a different way?
Nashville, Austin.
Nashville, Austin, Texas,
And
Orlando.
Okay.
Vice Chair and Councilman Mayfield.
The formula suggests that we do this weighting according to just the number of firms. So if you had 5 firms that represent 80% of the market, and you had 20 firms that represent the other 20% of the market, you would then be looking for 80% minority business contracting?
No, it's, so maybe when we get to the next example, and let's see if that'll.
All right, go ahead.
Okay. Councilman Mayfield?
Mr. Chair, I would like to add to your request if we also look at the GFEs, the good faith efforts of our competitor, not looking at the Carolinas, but looking at our true competitor cities. The GFE efforts and how they do their scoring may also help us.
Okay. Dr. Hollow?
Yep. So it's good to see this formula and kind of how we're developing essentially a rate a little bit and kind of multiplying those rates to get to another rate and then summing it all up. And make sure I'm making this the right interpretation of this. So for each scope, for any project, you're getting a score or a rate or whatever you want to call it, and then it's just added all up, and then on our consent agendas, that total is what we see.
It may be adjusted up or down. So, you know, depending on the project, depending on the opportunities that are available. So the formula just gives you kind of like that base figure. It may be that that's the figure we decide is appropriate because it may yield kind of what the past has shown us can be done. Or we may decide, okay, on this particular project, there's a lot of opportunity for this one, or we looked at a past similar project and we saw that the formula says 14, we did 15 on a past project, so maybe we might inch it up to 15 and say, let's see if we can hit the 15 mark. It really depends.
But that's a safe assumption to say
it's
not, okay. Thank you.
Good question. Okay. Now the example, perfect.
So here's an example application of the methodology. So what I did was I pulled 2. So this is the formula as applied for each and every subcontracting scope. You have a handout. So what you see on your screen are the 2 highlighted. So those are 2 scopes of work that I pulled out and applied the formula, or just kind of am depicting it here on the presentation. So you'll see, and so the formula is at the bottom, and also the columns each are labeled to help everyone kind of see how the math was done and what columns were multiplied or divided together. So for scope A, which is the glass, what we did was we also pulled one that didn't have any opportunity and one that did have opportunity so that you could see both sides of the formula. So for scope A, this is the glass package. So for glass, there's about $1 million worth of glass that was estimated on this particular building. The package of glass is 7.1% of the total dollars that we expect to spend on this particular project. So
And-
that's where the weighting kind of
And
comes in.
let me just make a reference to the 14,619. That's how
Not
you
the
get
20
that.
million.
That was
Not the 20,
not the
14
20 million.
14 million.
Right.
But we're expecting it to be proportional, in
The
effect.
goals are set on the cost of work. So the goals, the 14%, if we use the 20 million as the denominator, then that goal would be smaller.
Smaller, right.
Right,
Uh-huh.
right.
So when we are tracking this, we're basing it on what are the opportunities that are available. So it's not, all those other contingencies that may or may not get used. It's really what are the opportunities and how many do we have available for those opportunities. So we base it off of the cost of work.
Go ahead, sir.
Two questions. In the disparity study, they made a distinction between the ones that, where there was an opportunity and where there wasn't. So they measured our performance where there was and where, is that the same distinction that you're applying here?
Are you talking about for goals versus no goals contracts?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Targeted, not targeted.
No, yeah, so this is a little different because this is on a particular project, and so what they were looking at was the totality of city prime spend contracts, not subcontracting. Subcontracting was a part of it, but
Right.
it wasn't included as a whole.
And I don't see the answer to my prior question on this page. Is it supposed to be there?
I don't know, I can't remember.
What I'm trying to say is, if you have, say, 1,000 people are employed in this segment,
Right.
right? And 100 of them work for small companies, 10 small companies, and the other 900 of them work for 5 big companies. Are we going to award in proportion to the number of companies, regardless of how many people they employ or their?
So this is really how many firms do we have available in our database, and we're trying to derive at the likelihood that they will have an opportunity to participate on this particular project. So for painting, for glass, glass has 0, so that's not a good one. For drywall, the estimate is 636,000. So the piece of the pie for the drywall is 4.4% of that total work, which is 14 million.
I get that. I get all of that. Look at your number, 48 and 10.
So there's 21%. So the availability of MBEs for that particular scope is 21%. So we take that 21%.
Right, but that 21% could be only 5% by employment of the whole industry.
Yeah, and it's not looking at employment. It's just looking at the number
All right.
of firms
But I'm just saying,
that are certified.
And I think
that could mean that you're sending 20% of this contract to a portion of the industry that represents only 10% of the potential vendors.
But remember,
And
it's-
that particular basis strikes me as a little arbitrary, because they could be a lot of little tiny companies and one huge one, and then you're sending 90% to the tiny companies and not using the huge one.
Well, I would say for when we're looking at an MBE goal, it's really about the race and gender of the owner. And so we're trying to drive dollars to the ownership and trying to increase our spend with minority businesses, for example.
Yeah.
Not looking at, how many they employ.
Councilmember Mayfield?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Rosado, going back to the glass,
Yes.
to drill down a bit.
Yes.
Out of this total scope, does this scope include caulking, the supply, install, all of that is included in that, or is that an additional breakout? Because there may be opportunities there, considering we came back with 0 MBE. Are we looking at it in totality, or are we drilling it down for the other opportunities?
So for that that's a great example. So for that particular package, there aren't any opportunities where there aren't any MBEs that could win that package, right, for glass. But yes, for the when the bidder, I'm trying not to use so when the bidder, the owner releases the package, the CM at risk, when they release that package, they would set a subcontracting goal on the glass package because there may be caulking or installation or something else where there's an opportunity. So this is just helping us arrive at the goal. It's a formula to help us get to what a goal might be on this particular project based on the weighted scope of the opportunity, if that makes sense. But there are also goals set on each of these packages. So for each of these packages, there are subcontracting goals set on each of these packages as well.
So this doesn't break that down, because again, if anyone in the community were to pull this up and they see the glass is set as at $1 million, and if I'm a small business owner and I know I do specific costing for glass and I didn't receive a call regarding this, then I'm going, how can I look at this and see that there was an expectation that the caulking or the actual installation, that we actually outreach to identify opportunities there?
So during the outreach, they're talking about each of these packages, and they're also talking about what are the sub-opportunities anticipated for each of these packages. And so goals are set. So all of that happens during the outreach, and that's where, when they set the goal, and I don't know, the glass package, for example, hasn't been released yet, right? So I don't know what that goal, I don't have that information as to what that goal might be. But if, let's say that for the glass, they set a 10% MBE goal, whoever is going to provide that glass has to either meet that 10% MBE goal or show the good faith effort to who did they reach out to and what were the scopes of work that they reached out to them for, caulking, installation. So that's how the outreach happens. Really very similar to how we do it for hard bid.
So let me, and then I'll follow by the council member Braxton. I'm gonna follow up where I think Councilor Mayfield was going. Councilmember Winston. Yes, sir.
Thank y'all for the conversation. I know I just stepped in, but I've been following along on the live stream. So thank y'all for the questions and discussion. What do we have if we're consistently not able to reach goals? For instance, glass. Right here, every building that we build will have glass. Right. But we'll never have any chance of reaching the WMSB goals that we might like to have on these projects. So contractors are going to make good faith efforts, but they're never going to find them. Do we have, what is the point of our goals? Is it just to reach a certain requirement? Is it to impact the market? Is it to undo the effects of past policy? And if we're constantly unable to reach goals, for instance in glass, because we have 0%, do we have any steps in place that will aim to expand the market so that we do have vendors? And there is not the excuse that these suppliers are not there.
So I'll kind of repeat a little bit, and I apologize, but for example, for the glass, the goal, while we may not have any that can provide the glass, there are sub-opportunities within the glass scope.
Correct. I understand that. Okay. I understand that. I heard that. I understand that. But there's nobody here to provide the glass, so we'll never be able to. So we should have people that can reach this goal at some point in time that are, and it's WMSD contractors. So how do we get there?
And that's the conversation I think we're starting to have when we get to the next slide. You know, the policy the CBI policy is about growing our existing businesses and making sure that there's inclusion of our existing small minority women businesses. And so now the conversation, and Councilmember Mitchell I think said it best, is shifting, where it's like, okay, you know, we're helping our existing businesses, but what can we do to grow businesses in certain areas that may not have participation? So I think there's a shift in the conversation and a shift in a policy shift too.
Follow up.
Yeah, follow up. I heard you say earlier, no, it's not easy to kind of change things for certain contractors to train or people so that, you know, we can kind of expand that market. But businesses deal with requirements all the time that are not easy. When technology changes, they have to assimilate to that, or else they get kicked out. Sometimes that requires them paying for training constantly, making their employees smarter or more able to meet requirements of certain jobs. Do we put any expectation on our contractors that they, outside of the good faith efforts, that they have to affect the market so that there are more of these entities there? Do we give them any expectation that they hold some responsibility to reach these goals? Does exercise of good faith effort.
Right, so I think, again, those are the conversations that need to be happening moving forward. Currently, the CBI policy, that was not the intent of the CBI policy when it was drafted. That's not to say that we can't look at how do we have those conversations now.
So
But when we're setting,
what I'm hearing is that we have no policy that requires our contractors to
go beyond the good faith effort.
To go beyond, not just go beyond the good faith effort, but to ensure that they are able to meet these goals by making sure that these entities exist, that these services exist.
And the answer to Nancy,
I mean, that's not a focus of the policy.
so we need to change the policy too. Dr. Hollow, then the city attorney.
So, two things I'm kind of hearing. One is Ms. Mayfield keeps hitting on it, and I mean, when you multiply something by 0, you're always going to get 0.
Right.
That's basic math, right? So we know that. So we got to increase the numerator in block D there. You know, we need more MBE vendors for any scope. Definitely for the ones that have 0. Now, I'm not a big believer that there's 0 people out here that do glass. They're just not certified. So we have to get them to that point.
Good point.
I know we've heard that a lot. Say, oh, we didn't have any firms. There's some firms out there. We just got to get them certified. And so, you know, I would implore staff, what's the burden? Is it some type of issue with how long our application process is, or what, you know, do people feel like, oh, I'm not exposing my staff? Now, if they don't want to give us all the information that's required, that's a different story. But for those that are willing and wanting, I'm certain they're out there. We've got to do something there, and that's a staff side issue. From a policy side issue, you know, the second component I'm looking at, I didn't look forward, but we've got this good faith efforts thing in here, right? So we can increase the number of vendors all day long. We can set higher goals all day long, and have no scope where there's a number of 0 anymore, and that the hope is that we get there, but there's still this back door that says, hey, I got a way out. I don't have to meet this goal.
Right.
And so I want to, and I don't, again, I hadn't looked forward, so I don't know if we're getting there or not, but there's something there in that good faith effort. We mentioned the liquidated damages if the goals aren't met. I'm curious, have we ever gone that route? Or do 100% of the ones that don't meet the goals always meet their 55 point minimum and sneak out the back door? You know, Mr. Bakari, they said this thing can be gamed somehow. Maybe it can. But if we've never had to go the liquidated damage route and there's always 100% good faith efforts met, then something, you know, it's not stringent enough. And that's the policy conversation I think I would like to kind of get to, because disparity study says we've got more capacity. Right. We should be at higher levels.
That's right.
So if we're not at those higher levels, and one easy way to get to a bigger higher level is just increasing that top number. But if we increase the number and they still can get away with, you know, with it, then we can do disparity studies every 5 years. We're going to get the same answers. So I would, you know, I want to dive into this GFE stuff a little bit more. And then there's a legal question too, Mr. Attorney. And I don't know, you know, what can be set by us and what is set by the state. I would like to know what those differences are. So we're not having a conversation we have no purview over.
Exactly right. Dr. Allen. Mr. Attorney.
Excellent questions.
Right.
So let me give you a little bit of legal framework around your discussion. And I'll just use race as opposed to all the different characteristics as an example. As you know, under the Equal Protection Clause, race is a suspect classification and can only be used and taken into consideration by the government based on a pretty high legal standard. And that's the reason why in order to have a program, you've got to have a disparity study that shows disparity, past discrimination, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So what I would describe the goal setting is a legally defensible methodology that looks at the current lay of the land. And the current lay of the land, and what we're trying to do is make sure that business owners within the certain categories that the disparity says we can take that into consideration. I'll use race as an example, that they are getting an appropriate amount of city dollars based on the current lay of the land. Now, I say that to draw a comparison to what I hear Ms. Mayfield and others talk about, which is we need to change the lay of the land. We need to increase the number of women and minority-owned businesses in each of these categories. And that's sort of a separate conversation than what we can legally do when we set goals. So you've heard me say that the law doesn't allow quotas or set-asides. And that's why the law requires there be a good faith effort option, otherwise a goal becomes a set-aside. So I would suggest that if an analysis of the current market and the current availability that goes into this formula suggests a 10% goal, but we decide to double it to 20% without the data that suggests that that's a fair
Capacity,
depiction of the current market, I think that becomes legally sort of like a stretch quota or stretch set-aside. That what we're then doing is not ensuring that the current snapshot, that the spending across the current market conditions is fairly allocated, but it pushes more money disproportionately based on race than the current lay of the land suggests is appropriate. So, I mean, fair points all, but I think when you're looking at the actual CBI program and the methodology that we use to set goals, it's really driven by a legal framework that says, okay, you have evidence of disparity. In other words, you're not adequately utilizing the availability that exists today. And what we're trying to do is adequately utilize the availability we have today. And that's why you got the 0 and 5 and 10 and 48. And I think Mr. Triggs' point is well taken too. That's not very granular.
No, it's not.
I mean, that goes just to the raw number of businesses owned by women and minority business owners. But that's the level of granularity that we're at right now.
Councilmember
Real quick, I want to touch upon good faith efforts. Mr. Harlow, I just want to, I think I heard you say something. I'll make sure that I didn't misunderstand you, and if I didn't, that I clarify this. Good faith efforts only comes in at the front end on contract award. So it is not an option under our program for a company to meet the goal at bid, and you then award the contract, for them to later bail out and not meet the goal but save themselves by saying they somehow met good faith efforts. Good faith efforts is only at the front end when they submit their bid, and if they haven't met the goal, they demonstrate to staff for the 3-level review that you've heard described, and it shows up in front of you as a low bid that met good faith efforts.
Okay. No, that captures it. My point is still the same, but whether it's at the end or the beginning. But yes.
The other thing I'll mention, Mr. Chairman, real quick, because you asked on the good faith efforts, and I think you have a sheet that goes into it.
Yes, that's what I wanted.
We are under pretty considerable legal constraints because the state sets and mandates a good portion of that.
Okay. And so I have 3 in the hopper: Mayfield, Winston, and the Vice Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Mr. Attorney, thank you for the clarification. I think we're still missing the question and the statement that I've made. We, through our current programming, legislatively, have built businesses and created opportunities for primes to become multi-billion-dollar businesses. What I have been requesting and repeatedly request is for one, what is the outline that staff is using to identify more opportunities? Because it is not about just saying we do not have the business that can do this work. What is our role? And if the city doesn't feel like they have a role in that conversation, then we need to say that and stop telling the community that we have a goal around making sure that the diversity of our community is represented in opportunities of development in our community. So if we're going to say it, what I have yet to see is what is that outline? Because when we identify the multiple businesses, then we're giving you the opportunity to come to the table, which is why I asked specifically regarding glass. How do we drill that down? Because if you just look at it, you say, okay, 7%, only 7% is $1 million. Okay, that's still $1 million. Who gets access to that $1 million? And if what we come back with is one minority-owned business gets $20,000, that's not enough to cover one employee. But if we're doing our job with going out to the community and saying, here is the list of all the things that we need, not when the bid comes up, because we know this ahead of time. We know we already have a gap here. We've gone through hundreds of bids and hundreds of RFPs, thousands of them daily, yearly. We know that we have gaps. What is our role to go out and say, we need someone that can do metal panels, roofing? The CBI program has numerous relationships with UNC, Central Piedmont, other companies where we offer free programming and training and education. What are we doing to actually make sure the community knows these are the jobs that the city of Charlotte have gaps in? We want to let you, business community, know. You want to start your own, so you got an idea, start your own business. Central Piedmont has a class on it. What next? That's the question that has yet to be answered. That question does not challenge our legal responsibility. It is creating more opportunity for people. That's where I think there's a disconnect in the question that I'm asking and the response that's coming back. It's not a legal challenge.
Right.
It is a clear
Strategy.
strategy. What is the strategy that we're using to ensure that we're creating more opportunities?
Can I respond?
Yes.
Exactly.
Right.
My point was simply to try to get you to understand that as valid as all those objectives are, legally trying to use the goals to artificially heighten the goals to get there becomes legally problematic. I would turn, because now it's not a legal question.
Right.
Bingo.
I would turn over
Right.
to Tracy the issue of what are our strategies today and what are the strategies in the future to achieve what you're describing.
So if we can go to the next slide.
Wait a minute, Tracy, if you don't mind, I got two more in the hopper. Three. So, Councilmember Winston?
Yeah, just to kind of follow up on that, and one of the things you said about artificially, it has to be considered on the market. What do we consider in the market? Are we just considering the people that are certified with the city? Or are we saying that there are glass people out here there are 25% of the people that deal with glass in Charlotte are minorities and will qualify for this? And we can get there if they just filled out a piece of paper.
So taking what you and Mr. Mayfield said together, absolutely, if there's things that we can do, if we can identify companies and make that 0, a 1, or a 2, all of a sudden we've increased the goal because we have availability that we identified. And our program only uses...
We have, so the policy has a 13-county area, which is defined by the disparity study, so you have to have a significant business presence. And so those are some of the things that impact that number as well.
Well, I'm asking legally.
Yes.
Are we able to use the entire market to determine these percentages, these goals? Are we able to say that we know that these businesses exist within our cities?
So we can't just willy-nilly say, oh, there's a minority-owned business, because there's a verification process so that we know that they truly are who they claim to be or who we think they might be. So that's why you've got the rigor of getting certification.
But do we cross-reference this information with something like the Chamber of Commerce?
Right.
That might have some type of different database that knows more about what we have?
I think Mr. Powers has part of the answer.
So piggyback on Bob's point, in order for us to utilize a minority business or a woman business, they have to be registered with the state historically underutilized business office. Once they have been registered with the state, they are able to be operated across the entire state of North Carolina. Once they have been certified by HUB, they then can fill out a form with the CBI office, and they are part of the market for us to utilize. So ultimately, to your question, can we go out and say, if we found a minority business and want to use them on this project, they would not be part of the goal process because they are not part of our actual system for registration, and they're not also in the HUB system. So they have a two-step process to be part of the denominator for businesses to be counted towards a goal.
So what I'm hearing is that the answer is no. We do not consider the entire market of businesses in our community. They don't exist unless they fill out a certain piece of paper.
Right, there you go.
They don't exist on...
Right.
The state of North Carolina has mandated that in order for us to utilize minority and women businesses on any of our contracts, they have to be first registered with HUB, and then we bring
I understand what we can use,
Yes,
but
sir.
I'm talking about what we are considering the existence of the market to be. in that 13 county.
13
limits. These are
counties.
two different things. I'm saying, I understand legally what we can use,
Right.
you know, to give them a contract, but
You're
Bob,
correct.
Bob asked, said we have to consider the market, what is available in the market, economic market.
So,
Yes, but then in order to be worked into the formula, they have to do the two things that Thomas
two
mentioned.
certifications first, Councilman.
So
And yes, we can, as part of our work, we can help those companies that are out there who aren't in, get in. We want them in, right, Nancy? We want them in.
We want them all in.
Because we want to drive these numbers.
So I think we should somehow aggregate
Right.
all of these businesses that exist
Right.
in our community and cross that with that numerator that we're putting in.
So,
Provide some education on this.
okay, so Vice Chair Tark and Dr. Hollow, which is good conversation. I love this, because this has been a passion for mine. For how many years?
7 years.
7 years. So, Vice Chair?
To this last conversation, the certification process is exactly intended to establish who they are. We don't have a way of walking around on the streets and kind of going, yeah, that looks good to me. The whole point is we want this policy to be applied as it's intended, and we have to have some basis for knowing who the people are that are intended to benefit. You could put together a list of businesses, and the next thing you'd be doing is going through and saying, okay, let's see if this is really the right kind of business, and you'd end up right back where the state told us we needed to be. What we can do is we encourage. We have outreach, and we encourage people to qualify themselves. We try to find out who they are. So we would take your list, and we would go to those businesses that are on your list and aren't on our list, and we would say, guys, we can help you. Let's get you signed up. But we can't go around and start counting companies about which we don't know very much. I wanted to say also that I'm a little uncomfortable with the notion of placing a burden on the companies that we do business with to change the landscape. I think changing the landscape is something that we may want to do, and for which we should have policies that are aimed at filling in the gaps that we've identified. But to try to tell somebody out there, you're responsible for somehow promoting the creation or the existence of companies in spaces that are not currently inhabited, I believe is excessive. And the last point I'd like to make is, in all of these conversations, I hope that we're not going to send a message out to the business community that we feel that they're trying to game us, cheat, circumvent these requirements. There are a lot of people in the business community who are very actively engaged themselves in efforts to promote minority hiring and contracting. And I think in particular in this contract that we're talking about, the contractor claims that they actually have a very good track record. So obviously we need to be satisfied about that. But let's work from the desire to collaborate and harness the goodwill of the industry and not act as if we're trying to catch people who are trying to cheat.
Mr. McCarthy?
Yeah, actually, I very much agree with the Vice Chair's second point there of bringing this problem and challenge to solve to the complete doorstep of the private sector to solve. I think that is absolutely right. And while I'm just starting to get versed now more deeply into this topic, which is, bringing these types of affirmative action that we are trying to have this community do, I'll have more to learn. But one thing that struck me just now is that have we jumped over a topic of negative action? Of those who maybe we're not asking to go solve this problem that we, to be honest, and partners need to figure out how to solve and bring a solution to the table. But is there anything in this policy, and that more importantly, our operational practices, that make sure we're catching people who are taking negative action towards folks? And I just want to this could not bond both of these topics together better and be an example of what I'm talking about. I found in the 2004 Mecklenburg County Disparity Study that was done in Exhibit 612, which is the experience with discrimination by business owners. That's the title of that section. On page 276, this little excerpt that I want to read that is important. It says, in that same focus group, they did a focus group to compile this part, a second African-American masonry contractor who bid multiple times on city, county, and school projects stated, I went to Edifice and quoted them a price because I knew what their name of white competitor firm numbers were. So I dropped my number. They told me, well, we got this gentleman, we're going to give him both of the schools. I said, okay. They turned around, this gentleman had so much work that he couldn't get to them to pour their contract. Don't you know, I went on that job and asked them again, well, can I come in now since this man can't make it? Instead of using my price, 36 cents per square foot, they called a company way out of Mooresville somewhere that they was white. They paid them 45 cents a square foot. They just disregarded my numbers. In other words, they took my proposal and just put it in the trash can. In a personal interview, an African-American service firm cited an instance where they awarded the vendor firm but was never called. I follow up and called the owner who told me it would happen, but 2 years later I never got worked out. The staff told me that it fell through the cracks. I was told I'd be blackballed if I was too aggressive. So that was important enough for me to read because that is a firm example in both things we're talking about right now of something that is not maybe the affirmative action that we need to solve and not lay at their doorstep, but it certainly is an example of the negative action we don't want people to take. And one, if I can Google that and find it in 30 seconds, right? We should be able to insert that into how we make big $20 million decisions. And two, you know, this is that whole point of it's not just, where's the good faith efforts for our taxpayers' dollars? That's a negative action discrimination that taxpayers paid more than going with something because of somebody's discrimination. So that to me seems like a place we play and fill while we also find a solution to bring to their doorstep.
It's an allegation, just to be clear, okay? For the record, it's an allegation.
I'm just reading from the report. It's an example.
Dr. Harlow?
So, Tark's just coming with all the examples. It's great. It's good. Not sure if you're using affirmative action as a pun or not, but nonetheless, so 2 quick points. And one question for you, Bob, but I'll address Mr. Winston's point about if you're about to leave, just real quick. I get what you're saying around there's plenty glass companies or whatever other companies out here, and how are we measuring the whole pot and the whole market? I actually agree with Mr. Driggs as it relates to we want them in our system. Right. We want them truly certified. Some of that is we need to legally have them certified. It's what sounds like Thomas was saying, but also caution yourself on saying, hey, I want to add anybody who might have a glass business out there because when you increase that denominator, you get a smaller fraction later. And then your number actually gets lower if your pot is much larger. So there's a think about that from now. You want the numerator to increase, which is the certified MBE number, not the total. I mean, if they're part of the numerator, you want them a part of the denominator. You don't just want them a part of the denominator only, from a math standpoint.
Good point.
Bob, so I still didn't get exactly what I was looking for on the good faith effort thing. You answered most of it. It's more of a state thing than it is our policy. We just kind of have to implement it. 2 questions. One is, does the state set that minimum, or the state just sets the criteria? And then 2, this might be more for staff. We get these contractors who say, yep, I'm sorry, I can't meet the goal, but here's my good faith effort checklist. Out of these categories, which ones are we finding are overwhelmingly used versus maybe some others? Because I look at this and say, okay, if I hit the 25-point financial assistance one, I'm halfway there.
Right.
I just got to basically find 2 more categories. And then thirdly, for you, Bob, sorry, do we have any purview or say over how these points are, these categories of points are allotted? Like, if I wanted to say, hey, if we could have a policy discussion around, we can drop the financial assistance to 15 points or so. And so I know there's a lot there. I'm just trying to find a way to say, okay, if we know that contractors are hitting the good faith efforts and still getting awarded contracts all the time because they're consistently checking the same boxes, perhaps, not because they're cheating or anything else like that, but perhaps it's because it's too easy. I think it's at least worth exploring.
So Bob, can you address from the state side, and I do like the exercise he gave the staff about what is the most used category for good faith effort. So Bob, tell us from the state
Thomas
perspective.
is my teacher on this.
Okay.
So if I get anything wrong, he's going to correct me. So the state mandates 10 categories that have to be included.
And those are the 10s we have here.
Yep.
Got it.
And the state mandates that they are worth at least 10 points.
So stop right there. So to Dr. Harlow's point, financial assistance can be dropped from 25 to 10.
Or to anything.
Yes.
Right. But-
Or it can be increased, it sounds like,
Yes.
too. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I'm just-
And the state says 50 points is good faith effort.
So state
State
requires.
says that.
Yeah,
Okay.
so yes, in a sense that the way we developed, for whatever reason, our policy and gave more than 10 points to some of them, by using one of those, we have made it easier to get to the 50,
Right,
which is a good faith effort
Right.
requirement than the state mandates.
right.
So we can add other characteristics. We can put whatever points we want on. We can add something and give it 1 point, we can give it 100 points. The state mandates 10 with a minimum of 10 each, and the state says, however you allocate your points, once you hit 50, you've made good faith efforts.
So Bob, let me be clear to all the committee members. If we turn over to the good faith effort, bonding and insurance is 20. We could drop that to 10. Negotiation, good faith is at 15. We could drop that to 10. And financial assistance
Okay.
and joint venture and quick pay, all above 10. We have the flexibility to drop them to 10. Okay.
So I, just as a follow-up, so good to know that. And so last, I don't know, maybe last, but so can we, the actual categories themselves though are set? We have to keep what's on these pages.
That's right.
We can
State.
add
We can
to
add.
those criteria. Okay. So I really am curious from staff then, and I don't, I don't want to say, let's look at all the contracts we've ever awarded in the past 5 years or anything, but if you could give us some, I don't want us to say, let's adjust these numbers just arbitrarily.
Right.
I would really like to see something in a table format or something that says, hey, here's a percentage of all of these good faith effort totals are coming from these
This
couple
category.
buckets.
Yep.
And I don't have a percentage, but I can definitely tell you which ones are used because it's the same
sure.
ones that are used consistently for the
Okay.
most part.
Which one?
So contacts is a basic one, and actually contacts is one that is unique to the city and how we apply it. No other city or municipality has the contacts tied to any other GFE, so it makes it harder. So the city of Charlotte has implemented kind of a stricter enforcement of our good faith efforts than other municipalities have.
Whoa, stay
So
there.
for example.
Wait a minute, Nancy. Wait a minute. I thought these were state required, so how can Charlotte,
No, it requires these 10.
right?
But we have said at the city of Charlotte that in order for them to, for example, to earn the second GFE about making plans available, they have to have earned the good faith. So we've tied them together, and there's nothing in the state statute that says you couldn't do that. So so we've been doing this for years now.
Wait, stay there, Nancy, stay there.
I'm learning too.
Okay. But it might give us some flexibility. I think we're trying to make the program stronger. So you're saying contacts is what we, the city, is using, but other cities have chose not to use that?
No, let me explain.
Okay.
So we have a contacts category that is part of the state statute. These 10 are part of the state statute.
Okay, that's
What we've done is said that for a bidder to earn the credits for making plans available, for example, which is the second one, you'll see here on the bottom in bold that it says a bidder may receive credit for this GFE only if it receives credit for the first GFE.
Okay.
So that's what we've done to say to a bidder.
Okay.
So for example,
I heard something totally different, I'm sorry.
it is the city's and staff's
Same here.
perspective
Yeah.
that you make plans available.
Right.
But if you didn't earn the contacts and you only made those plans available to one person,
Right.
then you shouldn't get credit for making the plans available to one bidder because you didn't make it available to enough bidders so that there would be the participation in the goal.
So in that sense, we're tougher than the minimum.
We are.
Okay, see, we heard it totally different, but I'm glad we asked for clarification.
Sorry if I confused you.
All right.
Yeah.
So
So
which?
the ones that are
Yeah.
typically used is contacts, making plans available, breaking down work. Maybe you want me to give you the number 1, 2, 3, 5, attendance at a free bid, and 7, negotiating in good faith.
Negotiate, what?
Those are the top ones. There are others that may be used from time to time, but those are the main ones.
So let me go to,
2, 3, 5, and 7.
7.
you get the, so 1, 3, 1, 2, 3,
5 and 7.
5, and 7. So here's, so let me do this in sake of time, because committee, I really appreciate you all staying beyond the 1 o'clock. So let's leave the whole good faith effort discussion until June 25th, and let's talk about other things we need from staff. Dr. Harlow, you comfortable with 1, 3, 5, and 7? You need to see the data.
I'd still want to see the data.
Okay.
Yeah, that'd be
For
great.
just the
Thank you.
current year, is that?
Yeah, use,
That's fine, yeah. And thanks for kind of the generic kind of speculation there that you gave us.
Councilmember
we appreciate
Mayfield.
that.
So, Mr. Chair, it will be helpful if staff also brings back to committee, because we've spent a lot of this whole meeting so far talking about contracting, but 90% of our work is hard bid. So it will be helpful to know what exactly are we doing to create MWSBE contract opportunities in the hard bid sector, and that's meaning the prime. Because we spent this whole meeting really talking about the contract piece, but that's a very small percentage of the opportunities that we have. So it would be helpful to come back with a specific report out similar to what was received today around our MWSBE goals, expectations, because ultimately, as my colleague asked, what is our ultimate goal in here? And we have to have a real conversation around those hard bids.
So, and here's a couple of requests I have. Number one, staff, can you go through all that bid package, and when we see a glaring, like scope A or 0, identify the other packages till we have 0. And I think then we can have a discussion is, what is the solution? Because doing nothing is not a solution. So this committee need to develop a policy to address how we go from having non-MBE to one. And I totally agree with everybody else. This is not a private entity, heavy lifting. This is a more, what is the city going to do and how we going to work? And Nancy, it might be engaged with Kevin Dick and the ED side. So we need to have that type of conversation. So let me yield to Assistant City Manager. Come by you, Dr.
So you're hitting on exactly where I wanted to go. And I think what you've heard, and y'all have reiterated, or what I've heard, is that the CBI program is existing.
Right.
We don't have anything in place to grow the new opportunities. And so if the ultimate goal is to increase the percentage, which is where we all want to get to, how do we do that? And so I think there's a couple steps in the exercise that we start to work on. The first one is around forecasting. Not only where have the gaps been, but the work that's coming in front of us, where do we think the gaps are going to be?
Thank you.
We need to, secondly, from that, identify the areas of need. They hit on a precast, and I'm going to dive into a separate life, but if they hit on a precast company versus an electrical company. So where are the opportunities in that? Much harder to start up a precast company than an electrical. So where do we identify the needs and the opportunities? The third thing is then to engage and establish the partners to understand the market opportunities. So your chambers, your universities, where can we find that assistance to grow these particular things? And then it is, what is that program? What are the services that we can leverage? How can we leverage the existing construction community to not put a burden on them, but then enforce them to help mentor and grow these companies as well? And then the last piece of that has to be to certify. So kind of got 5 buckets that I think come towards an ED strategy, more so than falling, it's a joint partnership, I think, with CBI, but fall more to an ED strategy. So let me work with my team and Kevin and others that are way more familiar with some of this than I am, but to shape that out. But I did want to at least you all to feel like we're hearing it, that that's where the gap is, and we can start to think about some steps to remedy that.
Mr. Oz, you have a, sir?
I guess my question was, I wasn't clear on, were you looking for the gaps just for the central, or gaps in all scopes across
gaps in all
vendors?
scopes. Gaps in all scopes. I think we got to look at it. Dr. Harlan.
And top of that list says that there's gaps even when there's little numbers, but we've got to start where the zeros are.
Right, exactly.
But Mr. Chair, you mentioned something, and again, I don't want to jump too far ahead because I think the data will help drive kind of where I think I'm going with this, but, you know, one of these was a number 4 here, working with MBEs and SBs. And I know we're going to have a deeper conversation with this in a couple of weeks. You know, and I just happened to see this time, we have assistance organizations apparently, and on a whole list of groups that are supposed to be doing what we don't want, what we're saying we don't want the private sector to be a part of. And I agree with that. We shouldn't place that burden on folks to say, hey, you go find these folks for us. And I'm not going to go so far to say if we've tied in number 1 to say, hey, to get credit for this one, to get credit for number 2, you got to have gotten credit for number 1.
Right.
But perhaps we need these contractors to work with these assistance organizations and say, to get credit for some of these others, you need to work with an assistance organization. You know, again, it sounds like we're going to have a future discussion on that, but I'm going to lay that one out there for June 25th for sure. So, Thomas got a response.
Let me just make sure I clarify this for any discussion I have with Bob. When you're saying about the assistance with organizations, are you asking to have staff to look at and modify that particular GFE or look at a new category related to that issue?
So my premise is built on Nancy saying that we have the capability to make this stronger because we've done it before with contacts number 1 and said, hey, you can't get credit for number 2 unless you got credit for number 1. I'm saying don't create something new. Don't create a new category. Say you can't get credit for another one of these without getting credit for number 4 is what I'm saying. Yeah.
Very good discussion. I think something that's so important to our community. And so with 5 minutes left, staff, thank you. We'll see you again on the 25th. What time we meet on the 25th? 11:30? 11:30 to 1. So, Tracy, you want to talk about, for the next 3 minutes, the retreat?
Do we want to, for the next, I'll talk about the treatment, we'll talk about the next,
Okay.
the 25th.
Mr. Chair. Tracy, then Vice Chair.
I just didn't, okay, I had something pertinent to what we were just talking about.
Okay. Okay, let Vice Chair go and then we'll do the retreat. Vice Chair?
I just wanted to say, I noted on Monday night that I was very uncomfortable with the process of putting a contract on hold because of unspecified concerns about the MWSB. So I hope that we will move as quickly as possible to identify whether we think any action is called for under this contract. And my personal preference would be to proceed and to introduce new policies prospectively, because it does raise questions in my mind also about any other contracts that may be pending and our conversations that are ongoing with the contractors as to whether they should be looking at some new standard or can. And if you look, the description we got of all the work that went into getting to the point where this contract was ready to be signed, it's a lot, right? I mean, a whole bunch of steps had to occur, and we're now saying all of that could go up in the air. The terms on which the subcontractor is quoted probably have time limits on them. So I hope we can wrap up the issue of that one contract and then explore more fully.
So this meeting is not going to be over as quick as I thought it was going to be. I'm going to go to Councilmember Mayfield and Councilmember Newton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm hoping that what staff is hearing is that there is an opportunity for us to do more due diligence on the front end. Personally, I have a number of concerns, not only with this particular request, but others, and we cannot keep saying, well, at the next one, we'll fix it. At some point, we need to stop and start addressing it. Now, just as easily as my colleague pulled up information and saw that minority businesses have a history of challenges with this company, that same amount of time can be spent by staff to look at, because if we're going to have a relationship with the National League of Cities, and part of that relationship is the fact that the city of Charlotte is one of only 15 cities chosen, and we're looking at race and equity and looking at how we are creating opportunities, and we keep throwing out the numbers from the study regarding access to upward mobility. That access is not just in workers. When we have companies who have received multi-million-dollar contracts both from the city and county, and there is absolutely no diversity in your executive leadership of that organization, and on top of that, when working with minority-owned companies, or what you identify as minority is one single white female, there is a challenge as far as who is having opportunity. So just as it was easily pulled up, just as I have easily done a Google search and called out information, if staff cannot take the time to do that, when we're looking at the bids that are coming in, and we look at if we've worked with this business previously, and if they have historically always come in with additional amendments, therefore they are always over whatever the bid amount is, we have a responsibility and an opportunity to do some things very differently, because one of the other bidders could have been, if it doesn't fall under the mandatory lowest responsive bidder, we have an opportunity to do something very different. But we cannot keep saying, well, we don't want to address it now because it can hurt the organization. You're a multi-billion-dollar organization. This ain't going to hurt you that much. But it is going to hurt the community at large if we don't take the time to actively put the language in place so that any potential request that comes in have a clear understanding of what their expectation is to do business in the city of Charlotte.
Mr. Newton, bring us home.
All right. So I love the approach moving forward that was proposed by Tracy just now. I want us to also keep in mind that I don't want us to overlook the fact that we might be assuming that MWSBEs are informed about our business inclusionary policy. You don't know what you don't know, right? And so that aspect of outreach and engagement, particularly with the chambers, other organizations that can help educate and inform prospective partners or prospective certified MWSBEs within our business inclusionary program, I think is key moving forward, and hopefully, that's adopted as policy within our business inclusionary framework here. But I wanted to touch on so what Councilmember Driggs has said a moment ago, and whether this is a question for Bob, whether us placing Edifice on hold. I don't think that impacts other contracts, right? Because we're still going to be seeing those on a case-by-case basis. So it's not as though we're opening ourselves up to legal, liability in a grander scope, or are we? And then alternatively, now with Edifice, is there any legal liability that could, be opened here by kind of placing them on hold? And what I mean by that is, could we be subject to someone suing us?
Bob, you can judge from a legal standpoint, and William Haas would address it for other CM at risk contracts in the pipeline.
So I'm not sure what the manager's intent is in terms of the June 25th agenda, given what happened with deferring it. Because recall that the motion was simply to defer. So it was deferred.
Right.
And unless there's some reason the manager decides not to bring it back, I assume it's coming back.
Right.
I think hopefully the presentation on how we set the goal shows that the goal was set consistent with the council's policy. And what staff does, when they bring contracts to you recommended, they believe that they have processed that consistent with all policies and made a recommendation consistent with state law and city council policies. Again, that doesn't preclude you from exploring changes in policy, but we can't anticipate what that might be in terms of how we make our recommendation.
And follow up. So, and I think so. When I kind of try to objectively look at this, I think we can always decline to vote on a bid. So I don't think that would subject us to legal liability there. But then if we institute policy, can that be retroactively applied?
So let me answer the first question first. And this is a little bit different because this is a construction manager at risk, and there's more discretion and subjectivity that goes into the selection than a low bid. But I'll use
with a low bid, Bob, would be that sometimes the prices are locked for a certain period of time.
You got to come to.
So
you got to come to the mic.
You got to come to the microphone.
You got to announce yourself.
What I was going to say is that your real legal vulnerability, and you've heard me say this, is when you have somebody who's the low bid and they have met the goal, or not met the goal but met good faith efforts. If you reject somebody who has satisfied good faith efforts and not met the goal, we're legally vulnerable.
Got it.
There's more subjectivity with this contract because it's a CMAR.
If we change policy, can it be retroactively applied? Because, I mean, in some effect, I mean, I guess we might be changing the rules of the game in the middle of it, correct?
If you have discretion not to award the contract and you're not going to award it because you're anticipating a different policy, I think you can do that, so long as it's a legal reason for doing it.
William, and then Vice Chair.
So I want to point out two things. One, on the central police station. We're building this station because Bank of America is kicking us out of the space that we are currently leasing. The lease runs out, I think, the end of July, and we need to renegotiate that so we can stay in it longer. And so, in my opinion, we kind of have a time issue we have to deal with. We really need to show Bank of America some good faith that we're starting construction. So we have some, we're showing them a reason we need to stay in there a little bit longer. I think we're vulnerable there if we don't start. And we can't finish until we start.
Right. So we were scheduled to be in the building January 20. Jot that down.
January 2020.
January
Is
2020.
what we think right now if we were authorized to move ahead. I learned something. The other thing, also on the 25th, we have another construction manager at risk project intended to go in front of council for the building that connects Bojangles and
the link
and Ovens Auditorium.
Link extension.
It's through Barnhill. It's a
connector project.
It's a $17 million project. The goals, take credit for the out there. The goals are kind of in the same situation.
Okay.
Then y'all got time to fix it before it comes to council.
Vice Chair?
I just have a quick question.
Okay.
Just wanted to clarify, I did not state or intend that there was a legal reason for us not to do this. What I'm looking at is our business development and job creation priorities and trying to avoid having our actions in this area work counter to those. And when you send a message out to the business community that you reserve the right to walk away from a contract that they have spent a great deal of time and money negotiating in good faith in accordance with the established rules, that is not good for business. And that's the thing that concerns me. I need to talk to this guy.
That's Mr. RNC.
These are the two things I would request coming out of it with this deal. One, I would agree that we should not change the rules of the game in the middle, or honestly the 11th hour here. So, but what I would ask is, the number still seems low. So what I'd like to see is, you guys showed us a bunch of math and how you get to it with some examples. Offline, I'd like to see the breakdown of those inputs into this project, so I can know that there wasn't, that was the starting place, and then a bunch of people in a back room negotiated them all down, which my gut tells me that maybe could have happened, but you're shaking your head, so that those numbers will then show that that's the case or not. If that is the case, and it is the way you described it, while it may be a little unfair, we're not going to solve it in a month, but we need to solve it. So I would like to see that, and I would then say, all right, maybe, I mean, my problem is this isn't a $1,000 deal, it's a $20 million deal, right? So, I mean, the money we've given this company over the last 20 years is almost the same amount we've given the entire police department. So, you know, we need to think about that heavily. But secondarily, I would just say that one of the things that we do measure by is experience with similar projects and experience with the diversity program. So I would like to just understand also in follow-up detail how the other 7 companies all stacked up. And then I'd like you guys to actually take a couple minutes and look back at the track record of this versus those other companies. And I'm not saying it would be wise or even prudent for us to start over in this, but this is a huge contract. So, you know, I just want to make sure that right now we're approving a $20 million spend, but if it's anything like the track record of the light rail facility, well, that's going to be $22.4 million we're actually approving. So those would be my two asks before we vote.
And so my last two, I was trying to get us out at 1:30, but this is very important. And so Nancy, you spoke about some policy changes that currently in effect right now. I think this committee needs to look at. Number one, the location. So if you could bring the policy that describes the 13 counties that we have to use, and then you made reference to Part G, that there's a Part G policy that we are using now that I think the committee, we need to have some discussion on. So I would say with the other items, Ms. Dodson, as well as some policy discussion on at least those 2 items. Councilmember Mayfield, you have the last word.
So for disclosure, I also want to make sure that we get it on record that for me, it isn't about this particular individual company, it's about our policy. Because Edifice has done good work with MWSB East. And they have a long track record with a number of companies. There are companies that they do not have a good track record with, but there are companies that they have a good track record with. For me, it's more of the
About the
policy,
policy, that's right.
because we've had this conversation and asked some of these questions too many years now.
Right.
So at some point, we need to either identify the language that's going to get us to the aspirational goals that we say we have as a city, or we just need to tell the truth and say that's really not a goal.
Exactly. With that said, the Economic Development Retreat, don't you feel all this love? We want to continue to bond.
So I'll make this quick. Just on the retreat,
Right.
I think where we are is we're set on the 19th, on July
Everybody
19th.
good? July 19th?
Oh, no,
Dr. Harlow? What's wrong?
Y'all go ahead.
You not on vacation? I don't check your schedule. Don't even try. I check your schedule. You don't go to NBC Leo to the 25th. Go ahead, Matt. Matt, are you okay the 19th? All right.
Okay, so we're set on the 19th. A couple of the things we thought that we could discuss is, one, I think we'll be through most of our information gathering as it relates to developing an economic development strategic plan. And so we want to kind of bring some of that back to you and some of that discussion, as well as have some discussion about policy prioritization. Where do we want to go with policy? This has obviously been a main point of our discussion today. So that, from my perspective, is some of the main content on that. We'll look to do perhaps something off-site.
Okay.
But we'll secure a location.
So we initially said from 4 to 7, but I know the little Miss Asheville has a conflict already in her schedule. She's in a board meeting from 4 to 6. I'm trying to poll the rest of the committee. Do you have any flexibility, or 4 to 7 works better for you?
Yeah, I've got flexibility, so just let me know.
I know you cleaning teeth.
I don't know if I have the flexibility yet. I'll let you know in about an hour when I get back down there. But
So what other time works for you, 1 to 3?
I
1
can
to
do any
4?
time in the day or in the evening. I just have that board meeting.
Vice Chair. So we're talking about the retreat on July 19th, off-site. Are you flexible 4 to 7, or can you do 1 to 4? I don't think we need but 3 hours, and so.
Really? Because we can't get through a meeting at 3.
No, you're right. You got a good point.
We're staying high level.
You say,
High level.
Tracy said make sure she'll keep me high level. Okay.
July 19th.
July 19th.
You name
Flexible.
it.
Okay. So we have flexible. So let's try the 1 to 4 time slot, because if we do the 4 to 7, we're gonna miss. And then we are doing an activity. So you all gonna see me that whole day. So we're gonna go. We're heading to Top Golf to swing the clubs and let out some frustration and.
You know they have meeting space.
I'm sorry. One more. Go ahead.
For the agenda for June 25th.
Yes, ma'am.
Are we continuing?
Yeah. Oh, yes. Yeah. Yeah. June
Just wanna
25th.
Make sure everybody's clear on that. So
yeah.
that means we'll have to move Eastland.
That's right. Make sure Matt is happy.
Do we have
Chair, are we
anything
swinging the clubs
specific
at
on
each
it?
other? or-
No.
Okay, just wanted to clarify. Thank you.
We're gonna play golf.
Meeting space.
We're gonna play golf or eat. That might be all okay. Did you hear?
You know they have meeting
They have
space.
meeting space. It might not be bad just to meet there. Then.
Come on to District 3.
Yeah.
Come on up.
So you gonna have that driver straightened out by then, or?
Oh.
I lost about 14 balls. He was playing with and mad. So you know why I'm going to Top Golf, right?
they have nets, guys, so
They got
it's all contained.
Okay,
So,
so.
I don't think the
John?
nets are big enough.
Thank you, committee. It's a motion to adjourn. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you, staff.
Thank you, sir.